Good to go.
Great. Welcome back to Senate Education. Dr. Randazzo, we're so happy to have you with us. You are the Executive Director of Threat Management. Is it a company called ONTIC? Is that what it is, ONTIC?
Yes, it's a private company.
Private company. Terrific. So if you would tell us a little bit about yourself or how you got to this position, the position itself. We don't need to hear your whole biographical sketch. Anything that you think is relevant, and then tell us a little bit about specifically trauma issues. You know what bill we're looking at, I believe, and so any feedback you have would be appreciated.
Sure. So my name is Marisa Randazzo. I am a social psychologist by degree. I work as executive director for threat management for ONTIC, and ONTIC acquired a company I had started a number of years ago called Sigma Threat Management Associates. I co-founded and ran Sigma for about 10 years. ONTIC acquired us a little over a year ago, and we've been working in partnership and as part of ONTIC since then. My background that's relevant to the bill that you're discussing today is that I am also a threat assessment practitioner by training and by professional expertise. I have worked in the field of behavioral threat assessment since 1995. And I had a position as chief research psychologist for the U.S. Secret Service. In that capacity, back earlier in my career, in the 10 years I was with the Secret Service, I co-directed a study known as the Safe School Initiative, which was a joint study conducted by the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education. And through that study, we have been asked by the Secretary of Education to take a look at school shootings. How could we understand them? What, if anything, could be done to prevent them? And through the research that I co-directed, we created a model for behavioral threat assessment in K-12 settings, in school settings. Since 2002, when we published our guide on behavioral threat assessment for schools, my colleagues and I have been doing training for schools around the United States and also in different parts of Europe and Canada on how to assess threatening behavior in schools, and most importantly, how to mitigate violence when there is a risk for that. And it is a highly supportive process, but one that's often misunderstood. So I welcome the opportunity to provide some explanation on this. But just as a quick recap, after 10 years with the U.S. Secret Service, I co-founded this company, Sigma Threat Management Associates, and we have and continue to do so under ONTIC, specialized in providing training on behavioral threat assessment, guidance for schools and districts and higher education institutions and communities and workplaces on how to do this behavioral threat assessment process, how to set up a team, what kind of training is necessary, and really how to do this well, because behavioral threat assessment is the best available tool that we have to prevent school shootings, workplace shootings, violence targeted against public officials and public figures, any type of targeted violence.
Please go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm happy to sort of get into the weeds a little bit more, but didn't know if you wanted to do questions, or I can sort of give an overview of what we've done with various states and my take on the legislation, if you want.
I'm not seeing any questions, so that would be helpful at this point. That's great.
So we have worked with statewide efforts, including the state of Vermont, since at the K-12 level, since probably 2013, right after the shooting at Sandy Hook, to help moving from just individual schools and districts who are interested in setting up this capacity to really helping states build an ability to do this throughout their states. Virginia is the first state to require behavioral threat assessment for their K-12 public schools. And they actually have served as a great model for how to do this well. They required it, but also built in real internal capacity to provide model policies and procedures through their Virginia School and Campus Safety Center. to provide free, high-quality training on behavioral threat assessment to their schools and districts and school personnel. And then they also have an in-house capacity where they've got some in-house subject matter expertise within the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety, who is available to help individual districts figure out what program structure works best for them, help make sure they've got the right team members in place. Virginia's legislation also provides a lot of autonomy at the individual school board level to allow school boards to decide for themselves, what do we want behavioral threat assessment to look like within our districts? In Virginia, they're called divisions. But essentially to see, okay, do we want to have one team that serves the entire district? Do we want to have one team in every single school? So the ability to have that local flexibility and control over how to structure these programs, we have seen to be very beneficial. Something else that Virginia did, and maybe much more detailed than what you're looking to achieve with your legislation. But one of the things that Virginia did was they provided protection for the records of behavioral threat assessment teams. So they are not subject to any sort of FOIA request, except in the occasion where when there is a violent incident. If there actually has been violence that occurred carried out by someone who had been assessed by their behavioral threat assessment team, at that point, those records can be disclosed for use by journalists, the public, et cetera. So it provides reassurance to the individuals serving on those behavioral threat assessment teams that their discussions and their record keeping isn't going to be the subject of a kind of inappropriate scrutiny when it shouldn't be. So it's important that this process is kept as confidential as possible, recognizing that federal education laws allow for disclosure of information in the case of health and safety emergencies. But to do threat assessment best, it is very helpful to know that those records will be kept confidential, that a student or a staff member or anyone who is the subject of a behavioral threat assessment doesn't risk having that information disclosed inappropriately.
So if we could pause there for a moment, I'm wondering if you could give us an example of how a behavioral threat assessment team would work.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Let me I'll walk you through a hypothetical that's based in real life. I've got it protected, so it doesn't disclose who might be involved. We worked on a situation a couple of years ago with a student who had been referred to us because friends had overheard him saying he wanted to shoot up the school, and the information came to us. We were outside consultants, but it had come to the school's attention through a sort of a bad game of telephone, and I have that kind of in air quotes, where students who had been at a party were discussing with others that someone had overheard that person at the party say that he wanted to shoot up the school, but the person who brought it forward was then overheard by their parent. And so the parent overheard a conversation, didn't get much detail from their child, but immediately alerted the school. And the parent also called the FBI at the same time. This was right after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting. And there was real concern about, okay, what is this? And we needed to get all possible attention and immediacy on this. So the FBI took a look at it, didn't see an immediate basis for concern, but the school felt like it was really important to have a full threat assessment done in order to know, was there any risk? Did they need to take any action? And then also to reassure the parents in their community that the school was safe. So we were brought in as outside consultants because that school did not have a threat assessment team. We quickly were able to figure out that the information that had come forward that the student had said he would shoot up the school was very different from what actually was said. And we were able to.
So just 1 second. I just want to make sure. So if the behavioral threat team had been in place, what would have happened?
All right. So I'll put this.
That's what this would do.
Sure. Sure. So in a situation like this, with a behavioral threat assessment team in place, they would immediately start to gather information from multiple sources. What did teachers have concern? They would talk directly with the student. What did you say? Did you say this? Why did you say this? What's going on? They would talk with coaches, with other staff within the school. Oftentimes we get really helpful information from food service workers, bus drivers, custodial staff who are in a position to see things or hear things or observe behavior. And would talk with the family. This has come to our attention. We believe your child said this, and they're saying they did, or they're saying they didn't, and we're here to piece it all together. So it is a process where you're essentially collecting the dots. What else do people know? What pieces of the puzzle do they have? And then connecting the dots. How do you put it all together? In a case like this, a team would look to see, is there some indication this person said this, that they threatened to hurt the school or hurt people at the school? And if so, why? And if they didn't, what do we think may be going on? Oftentimes, especially in this day and age, when there's so much news media around violent events that occur throughout the United States, and we hear about it however distant we may be from the actual event, we have a lot of fear going on. So we get a lot of reports of people who think they see things on social media or read something in an essay that scares them. And this is where a behavioral threat assessment team comes in to really look at and say, let's piece this all together. Do we have someone who's thinking about or planning to engage in violence? And if so, what can we do to mitigate it? So in a case like the one I was sharing with you, in that case, it turned out to be that the student was upset over a breakup. He had not actually said he was going to shoot up the school, but he had said that if his now ex-girlfriend were walking in front of a truck barreling toward her, he wouldn't go out of his way to push her to safety. But because he was an odd kid and a kid whose behavior came across as different and scary, a lot of people were really fearful about him. And in this case, the behavioral threat assessment process was able to uncover that he actually was a kid who had been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, but the parents were ashamed of that diagnosis and did not want to let the school know. They thought they could just handle it themselves. Once the school knew, there were a whole array of resources and accommodations they were able to bring to bear to support this particular student, actually help connect him to social skills, so he was able to integrate better into the sort of social fabric of the school. And they saw no indication that there was any risk whatsoever. So a behavioral threat assessment team not only can identify cases where there is a concern, and I'll get to that in a minute, but also help rule out cases where there may be fear, but no actual risk. Now, let me underscore something here. In situations where we do encounter a student or person who is thinking about or planning to engage in violence, one thing that is striking and often people find surprising about behavioral threat assessment is in virtually every case, when we're working with a student and ask them, are you thinking about or planning to engage in violence? They will be honest and tell us yes. And here's why. They're often conflicted by these own thoughts. A part of them wants to engage in violence. A part of them doesn't want to engage in violence. A part of them feels like, well, now I've put this out there. I've started to tell my friends that they're looking forward to me. I can't stop this on my own. But a part of them doesn't want to do it. The vast majority of school shootings that we have seen in this country are actually sort of suicide homicides. They're people, they are carried out by students who are despondent and see no other way out of the problems that they have. They see violence as a good option, maybe the only option, maybe they'll get some fame or notoriety at the same time, but they typically get to a point of thinking about and planning to engage in this violence at school because they themselves see and feel at the end of their rope, see no other way out. And the reason I want to underscore this is because behavioral threat assessment can do a particularly good job at preventing school violence by using tools that we already have at our disposal to help someone who's despondent, who's suicidal, to stabilize them, to help solve their underlying problems, get them connected with resources to help them cope with problems that feel overwhelming, and get them away from what we call this pathway to violence and onto a better, more positive path.
Do you happen to have one of the things, once we bring this to the Senate floor, everybody should be rightfully asking us, hey, is there some evidence there? Has this been studied, for a little while? You have some documentation and some study that you could share with us that would show that this is going to make a difference?
Yeah, there's actually a fair amount of documentation coming out of the University of Virginia. So University of Virginia and the Curry School of Education has been doing research on threat assessment within Virginia schools for a long time. And Virginia schools use a couple of different models. So there isn't really good information about this model versus that model because there are only some nuanced differences between them. But behavioral threat assessment as a general fact-finding process to figure out if someone is thinking and planning to engage in violence. The Curry School has got some great research that's shown that it reduces the use of punitive punishments like suspension in cases where support is more appropriate, that it reduces racial disparities in disciplinary infractions. And that's a really important piece because there's often concern by people who misunderstand what behavioral threat assessment is. There's often a concern that it is a way to feed the school to prison pipeline, when in fact it is the opposite. It is a way to get help and support to someone who is struggling and to try to keep them from making a decision that ends up determining the rest of their life by landing them in the criminal justice system. I think the confusion around that comes from the fact that we say it's important to have law enforcement as part of these teams working in partnership because having a multidisciplinary perspective can be incredibly helpful for information gathering and figuring out, hey, what options do we have to off-ramp this kid to get them onto a better path and away from thoughts and plans of violence. So it is a process originally developed by law enforcement that we think is enhanced by the involvement of law enforcement, but it is first and foremost a school-driven process or a district-driven process, not a process that's primarily law enforcement in nature.
So yes, if you would be willing to share some of that, our committee assistant, I think, has your contact information, and a couple of studies would be great. Senator Weeks.
Earlier. Well, yeah. So just a curiosity about the behavioral threat assessment teams. From your experience, and G, if you want to comment, feel free. From your experience, is this best based at a kind of a regional level versus every school level? Because I don't think that this is, all too frequent, but certainly requires a depth of background and training to be effective.
It's an excellent question. And I would say that with the experience that we've had working with the state of Vermont and doing training for supervisory unions and school personnel, law enforcement, and counselors throughout the state, you all have an incredible sort of range of different pockets of expertise, and you don't necessarily have all the expertise within all of your schools. I would think that Vermont could actually start with a structure that's more regionally based, or one team per supervisory union that supports the schools, as opposed to expecting this level within each school. But what I would tell you is incredibly important is that it's within each school to have a couple of personnel, an administrator, whatever local law enforcement is the liaison to that school, and a school counselor. They could serve almost as a screening team or a triage team when something comes up within their school, that they can take a quick look and say, hey, do we need to alert the supervisory union level team or the regional team? Do we need to get some eyes on this? We have helped states develop some clear screening questions. If we see this, then we need to alert this higher level team, and to then work in partnership with that team to work through the issue. There is real benefit in local knowledge. So to make sure you've got some folks within each school building who understands what behavioral threat assessment is and can work with a regional team, I think is a model that could work well for Vermont.
Yeah. And a follow-up question. What levels of training are we really talking about here for local school levels, maybe up to a supervisory district? I mean, are we talking about a week of training, or just to kind of give us a sense?
Yeah. So two different types of training I'd recommend. One is something that's already going underway in Vermont, that's through grants that Vermont has gotten, through your Department of Public Safety has gotten from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Stop School Violence grants. It's a federal grant program. So we already have underway, they already have been sponsoring, and we've been providing training at sort of the what they call the awareness level, we would call a basic level. For people who are actually going to be working on the situations, I would recommend a basic training and, if possible, advanced training. Those are typically done in one day, full day, or perhaps 2 days. The basic training really teaches you how to handle these situations. What are these behavioral threat assessment procedures and why do they work? And then the advanced training is really a practice opportunity. So a chance to work through hypotheticals, tabletop exercises, learning to work together as a team. So for the people at the regional level, for example, who are really going to be the ones responsible for handling this, if this is how you want to structure it, they need at least basic training, ideally basic and advanced. So 2 days, 3 days tops. And it can be done back to back, or it can be spread out. The other training that's really helpful is to have what we call kind of a general awareness training. And the language differs a little bit from how Vermont's been billing the training they've been doing. But for us, it's really important for every employee within schools to have kind of a basic level of what is threat assessment and why should I care about passing along a concern when I am worried about something, when I've seen something and said something. That training is typically kind of 45 minutes, and you can do it as a video training. You can do it as part of a staff meeting or some sort of on the job training for all of your personnel. Just these are the kinds of behaviors that are helpful to report to our behavioral threat assessment team or our screening team in our building, and they'll get it to the regional team. So they know kind of what to look for, and also are motivated to know, hey, they may be the first person or the only person to know of this concern. And it's really important to move it along to a group that's trained to know how to handle it.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Follow up, length of time to effectively implement this type of threat assessment team? 1 year?
So this is actually a process that can be stood up pretty quickly. I recommend people go to the training if they're going to be serving on a team or serving in a screening capacity within their schools. I recommend that they go to that 1 day training so they know what it's all about. But you can set up a team pretty quickly by just figuring out who do we want to have at the table, and you want multidisciplinary. It's not just an administrator's job. It's not just a law enforcement's job. You want those different perspectives at the table. But ideally, you all attend training together, and then it's a matter of developing a policy that just says we have this team, and this team is authorized to do this work on behalf of the school or the supervisory union or this region. And here are sort of the overview of procedures that they may follow. It doesn't take much work to get up and running, but training is absolutely critical. And one thing we have seen done well in different states has been sort of I think of it as sort of a big brother, big sister program, but for threat assessment teams. There are areas within Vermont that have been doing this for a while, for example. And so if you can pair expertise, I think there are a couple of teams in the Burlington area, for example, that have been up and running for a while. If you have teams that have been doing this, that you can make them available as a resource to teams that are new, to groups that are new to stand this up. Any lessons learned, anything we should avoid? Do you have any model policy language we can go by to make it easy? But it is designed to be a nimble process rather than a cumbersome process. It's designed to quickly get people together who are trained to know what to do when you have a threat come forward, to quickly gather information and ask some specific questions to make an assessment about, is there a risk here? And if so, then to quickly figure out, okay, what intervention can we do here to move this kid or this person away from thoughts and plans of violence, get them support to help solve whatever underlying problems they're facing, and get them onto a better path. So it's designed to be an agile team, not a cumbersome process or program.
Thank you.
Ms. Garber, if we wanted to hear from a team that's working right now in Vermont, would you be able to help us with that, or is that a question for the agency? I think they mentioned, Doctor mentioned that there might be 1 or 2 in Burlington, just so we can get some real hands-on sort of life experiences.
Yes, we can definitely arrange to have someone
Yeah, just,
testify.
yeah.
for-
One or two people over Zoom, just so we can experience that, and Hayden can set that up. Great.
The emergency management coordinators and directors in the state,
Yeah,
there is a statewide, and they've done tabletops for, natural emergencies and things
Yeah.
like that. But they're probably somebody who should be involved in this at the municipal level.
And I think they may have been the impetus behind this originally in seeking that federal grant. So I know Sonny Erickson and also Rob Evans with the Vermont School Safety Center have been heavily involved in that. So they may be good people to talk with.
Senator Williams, tell me that group again, the local.
Emergency management coordinators, in the actual name of the state organization escapes me right now.
Yeah, okay.
But they are formal. I think the one that directs it is out of St. Mike's in Winooski. Culture.
Great. That was very helpful. Any other questions or comments at this point? Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Where are we reaching you, by the way? Are you?
Just outside Washington, D.C.
Oh, just outside of Washington, D.C. Well, we're about to get, we hope, about 12 inches of snow. And I think something maybe you're going to get a bit of rain, but I don't think you're going to get any snow.
I think we are too. Well, you all are much better prepared for it than we ever are down here. So,
Well, if you ever find your way up to Vermont, please know we would love to meet you in person. Really appreciate the testimony.
it's my pleasure. I wish you luck with this. It's a very important endeavor you're undertaking. So thank you for the time to share my information.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thanks.
So this feels like we're moving in a pretty good direction. We'll get some more information over the next couple of days. Yeah.
Just a curiosity question. Do we need a JFO input for like training budgets and that kind of thing, or is that a different?
It's a great question. I suspect, but we can check next week with the secretary, that this is all coming from the agency's budget. But I see yeses, but we'll confirm with that. I don't see an appropriation in here.
There's no appropriation in the bill. Word in this language. In terms of the training that's been going on now, it's all through federal grants.
Okay. It's a great question. Yeah. And so we'll just maybe dig in a little bit more. If you could come back to us when you are here again, I think maybe Friday or next week officially, just confirm that when somebody says, is all this going to be covered by federal grants, we can get up on the floor and say, well, when Senator Weeks gets up on the floor, he can say yes.
Well, and the other question would be, when
Yeah.
the grants run out, will it be part of the bottom line for the
School districts.
budget? Which
It's a great question. Yeah.
and fund expenditure
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. So we can talk a little bit about funding. Good. So we'll see a new draft of this bill on Friday with some more testimony. Senator Hashim, in any way, are you feeling like this should stop down in judiciary before it goes live on the floor?
I don't see anything that really comes into that realm unless we start getting into specifics about law enforcement or courtrooms or emergency orders or anything like that. But I can also ask Senator Sears.
I'm thinking we'll have it out. Hopefully our goal would be to vote on this next Friday, a week from Friday. Goal would be the following after town meeting week. But yeah, that would be good maybe just to check in and see.
I mean, if anything, I think it would be GovOps more so than judiciary. If you're thinking that it needs to go make a pass through any other committees.
I don't think jurisdiction wise there's anything in here, but sometimes, you know, there's always the, hey, can we see it for a little while kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Mr. Nichols.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Before we get started on, do you remember prior to your time here, actually, Mr. Glass, you might.
She was later than me.
Oh, she was, all right. But I know you both have great sort of contact maybe with your former colleagues. For a bill called the Green Cleaning Bill.
I remember that as a superintendent.
You do?
Yeah.
All right, so this was a bill that basically was trying to incentivize school districts, using better products to prevent kids from getting asthma and all that.
I think there was a carrot and a stick to it, if I remember right. You couldn't use certain products, and you were gonna be incentivized if you use some, but I don't know whatever happened, that ever came to be.
Yeah, well,
I thought we did have to use certain products in schools because of that bill.
you thought what?
That we did end up using different products in schools because of that.
Yeah. Who would be a good person for me to ask? This came when Joey Donovan passed it, and I would love to be able to say that the work continues on.
I wonder if Jeff, that of us would be Jeff.
Okay.
Would he, if he doesn't know,
can-
he would be able to find
he
somebody
could
who does.
ask. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just curious. All right. All right, we had, Mr. Glassie, do you want to join at the same time, or? I think
I
you're
have
speaking from
separate,
one
so-
voice, I think.
No. I don't think so.
Really?
On NIAS, Jeff Francis can't be here.
I understand.
And so he basically said he's gonna echo what we're saying, but I'm not sure what Sue's saying, or she's sure of something.
Okay, so what we're just trying to kind of, we've been talking, we talked to NIASC early on. We talked, what it does. We know that they do some independence and some public in the state. I think we heard from one person, maybe 14 high schools only go through NIASC. Trying to just get a sense of whether or not this makes sense for the state, to say, hey, would this kind of bring everybody up in a way, or does this just extra work, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then related to it, well, maybe that was it. So,
Great, well, I will just go into my prepared.
yeah,
remarks.
great, thanks.
I've been testifying in a bunch of the committees and I've got a lot of stuff going on right now, so I'm gonna stick to my script more than I normally do, just because I just
Sure.
don't trust myself there. So officially, for the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, testimony on the idea of NIASC accreditation for public schools in Vermont. I listened to the testimony of the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Their Executive Director, I believe his title was Mr. Staples, in this committee.
Yeah.
And I also listened to his testimony along with two of his colleagues in House Ed, and they were talking about NIASC accreditation. The VPA does not believe that all public schools, or frankly, any public schools, should be required to participate in the NIASC accreditation process. This is not a condemnation of NIASC accreditation process in any way. Some public schools in Vermont do use NIASC and found it to be helpful. Most do not use it for a couple of major reasons. I want to articulate a little on that. The first is the cost.
Yeah.
Requiring NIASC accreditation will essentially be yet another unfunded mandate passed on to the public schools. Now, I noticed that in the handouts that you were given, at least that were online,
Yeah.
by NIASC, they did not show their cost structure. So I went to their website, and they don't provide information on their website for how much they charge for independent school dues or for public school dues, or fees and services in New England and within the United States. The only fee schedule they provided was for international schools on their website. And I assume they'd give good old New England State a better deal than that. So
Do you remember what the international was mentioned?
I do, I've got that in here to link for you. However, in testimony in front of the Health Education, the Association of Independent Schools for New England, which works with mostly the elementary schools, they
Right.
testified over there too. And they did have a structure and they showed the cost. And essentially, the lowest fee that they charged was $1,080 annually for schools who have less than $1 million budget, and another $365 annually for having under 99 schools.
Nichols, is that like an annual fee they?
That's
do?
annual, every single year.
So it's not as though you're coming in.
You're
this is
paying
the
dues
assessment.
and enrollment
I see.
fees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did a little bit of math on the back of the napkin. In Vermont, we have 297 schools. Safer to all say around 300, because in some places, like, do I count Keating as one school or two? So I just counted the buildings basically. We have 297 independent structures.
Yeah,
If every school had a budget of less than $1 million and had less than 99 kids, which would not be the case, our cost would be $429,165 every year. And of course, obviously, it's going to be a lot higher than that. Now with NIASC, again, I mentioned I can only find international school money. Those rates were for the lowest for any school. This would mean a school had 5 kids or a school that had 5,000 kids. It's $325.65
annually again.
annually. And then they didn't mention whether they had any other additional fees. So that would come out to just under $1 million annually in the state, 969,000. Fortunately, though, a couple days after your testimony, we have drop-in meetings on Monday and Friday mornings with elementary principals and high school principals. I can never remember which one's which. But in the high school meeting, there were two principals that had gone through NEAS recently.
Yeah.
One was the Woodstock principal and one was the assistant principal at Rutland High School. Woodstock says they pay $3,600 a year and Rutland pays $4,340. So now we're talking real money if we were doing that across the state.
Jamie, I just interrupt for a second.
No, it's fine.
And we can always, if we want to pursue this, I don't think we're gonna have time, but do you have any sense of why they wanted you in the S?
So I do for Rutland. One of the things that was, well, this is from the assistant principal's perspective. She said she talked to the superintendent about it. And of course, the Superintendent's a friend of mine, used to be an EC member, Bill Olson, great guy.
Yeah.
And he said, because they have some private schools there and stuff, he wanted to be able to say that they had NEAS accreditation as well. Because some of the schools were trying to use that, may potentially use that against Rutland High School, was the worry. Woodstock, Garen Smale, who's a great principal, said he thought it was a really useful process for them.
Yeah.
And their board did not mind paying for that process.
And again, if somebody wanted to do it tomorrow, they could do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As a superintendent, full disclosure, I stopped us doing it in Eastford, Michigan.
Yeah.
Because the state had so many other requirements for public schools and we had to go through continuous improvement plans and all those things that private schools don't do. I just saw NEAS as being very redundant.
Yeah. So how do we pick up, you're probably getting the emails also about this lack of special education in the Springfield schools. I'm getting emails saying, hey, you know, this is a big problem. Here
Yeah.
we are, Springfield Public Schools aren't doing special ed the right way. How do we make sure that
See,
doesn't?
NEAS don't change anything with that
Okay.
because the private schools right now do a lot less than special ed than public schools. And that's true across the country.
Right, but back to that situation.
It's all about staffing.
Okay.
It's all about not being able to hire people. You know, in the Springfield case, having talked to people that are in Springfield, the former
Yeah.
superintendent is now in New Hampshire and other people in Springfield, they can't hire the staff. They cannot find anybody to work with some kids that really have high needs and they don't know, you know, they keep trying, they're advertising, they're doing everything that they feel they're doing everything that they can.
Yeah, no, we're
So-
gonna have them in, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, we just try to understand that.
Right.
That
It's
situation.
a huge problem. And it wasn't a problem nearly like it is now, 10, 15 years ago. As I testified earlier in here, we have a lot less people coming into teaching.
Yeah,
And we just don't have the positions. We had a teacher recently leave a public school in Vermont,
yeah,
and she's taking a job working in a factory because she's gonna get more money, working in a factory. And I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm a,
I know.
superintendent, whatever, a principal. I'm not even one of those. I'm an executive director. But in those positions, you know, you don't worry about that as much because it's a full-time job. But for
Yeah.
some teachers starting out, it's not tenable and they can do better with less stress than they're facing,
Every
in
day.
the school every day.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, so it's questionable as to what advantage educationally public schools would receive if they were required to have NEAS accreditation.
Okay.
So first of all, NEAS is strongly affiliated with colleges and high schools. They certainly serve as a bare minimum. They're like a floor thing, and that's good. Private schools need to have something like that because otherwise they won't have anything. But the quality of education in private schools and public schools is completely different. Public schools are responsible for all Vermont laws, all rules. They've got a board that oversees them. They have to follow the laws and rules, but set by the General Assembly, the Agency of Education, and State Board. They also have federal rules. You get the special education argument that they have to follow, and they're not for-profit institutions or businesses, so they're transparent in their financial matters. They have elected school board members that make sure they're accountable to their local citizens, and
Do we
private
have
schools
any
don't have that
for-profit-
obligation.
Any for-profit schools in the state?
I think it's it depends, I guess, on how you say for-profit. I mean, pure business
I mean, like
model,
Phoenix University is for-profit.
Yeah.
St. Mike's is not.
yeah. Yeah, I
Do
don't.
we
know
have
the
any
answer.
for-profit?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I would make the argument that if you're paying employees and you're running it as a business and you're not taking all kids, maybe it's not for profit. Maybe private's a better word.
I think.
I know a lot of people say independent. I use the word private because they're not following the same rules. And when I talked to the principals that no longer use NEAS, this is important. Cost was not the only aspect of the process identified that worried them. They talked about a massive amount of paperwork and pre-work that schools must do as part of the process. They also voiced that public schools already are accountable to the Agency of Education, the test scores, the financial restraints, to an elected school board, to a continuous improvement plan that are all open to citizen feedback and AOE oversight. And one principal I wanted to share this really seemed to sum up the overall feeling by saying that if Senate Education wants to really help all Vermont children in schools, then come up with the same rules for everybody so that private schools are held accountable the same way as public schools. A resounding point was if the General Assembly, U.S. Department of Education, and Vermont Agency of Education removed all the other layers of things required of Vermont public schools that private schools don't have to do, and then they'd be glad to do something like NEASC, even though they believe there are many other things that could be done that would be more effective in terms of school improvement and accountability. And when I walked in the room, Senator, I heard you say something about trying to have a level playing field wherever you can. That's it for the BPA. That's what we believe too. You know,
No, I
same
think what we were
rules,
talking
same rules
about-
for all schools. I just heard you say something about that. It may not have been about this.
We're talking about templates, making sure that it's consistent across the
Yeah.
board, so you go from one school to another.
And I think that's beneficial for kids, for sure. And what we know from the research is that in Vermont, our most, our socioeconomically poorest kids tend to move a lot. My last year as a superintendent, or one of my last years as a superintendent, we did a study, and we found out that 10% of our kids in Franklin Northeast, and you're gonna, the superintendent from there is coming in today to talk about something, maybe it's this, should ask her, maybe it's S56. 10% of the kids that were in that school system when I left as superintendent, or the year before I left, did not live with either parent. Those kids are moving.
10%.
10% of those kids did not live with either parent, live with a grandparent.
Yeah.
Live with a sibling, we're in state custody, we're in foster care, we're in DCF custody. Think about that. 1 out of 10 kids roughly, homeless, whatever it might be, we're not living in a home with a parent. And we've got communities that are like that.
When you left,
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
6 years ago, 7 years ago.
I'm sure it's worse.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's better.
No question.
Okay, any questions for me about NEAS? You don't have a question?
Well, I mean, one would ask, why,
I'm getting picked on over this.
why do it?
Yeah, that's why we stopped doing it where I was, because we were doing back then as New Mount Star.
Right.
We had all those things that we had to do with public schools anyway, where we're getting tons of feedback and oversight. So that's why we
You
stopped.
said you only
doing it.
have 12 high schools that do it in this.
Something like that, yeah. Used to be every high school in the state did it,
Really?
Yeah. or at least, I think just about everybody. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, because remember,
Yeah,
prior to the No Child Left Behind stuff,
yeah.
there wasn't really a lot of oversight at the state or federal level. There was oversight
Oh,
at the
okay.
local school board level.
Uh-huh.
And one of the ways that they could show that schools were at least meeting a floor
Yeah.
was to have them do NEAS. And that's, so a lot of high schools did do NEAS. I don't know if all of them did, but a lot of them did.
So did that change? So that was connected, its departure was connected with No Child Left Behind.
In my opinion,
When
yeah.
that came in.
Yeah, because it brought in all kinds of oversight, so that was no
Interesting.
longer needed.
So maybe those 12 just kept it going.
Could be,
Could be.
yeah, could very well be.
Great.
Okay,
Yeah.
am I staying here or am I leaving?
No. We're gonna have you back.
You're gonna
right
be
after
concerned for
Mr.
me.
Glasgow.
Okay.
But you don't need to go very far.
I won't, I'll sit right here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me in. Sue Zaglavsky, Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association.
So who was your predecessor then? Was it
Nicole Mace.
Nicole Mace?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That was maybe pre-COVID? Well,
Yeah.
COVID.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2019 is when
Okay.
she left the VSBA. So, yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for asking me in to talk about NEASC accreditation. Just like Mr. Nichols, I prepared by listening to the testimony before your committee by NEASC President Cameron Staples, and also there was NEASC testimony in House Education that I listened to. That day, I think Jay was in here too, and the thought was that there were about 25 schools that were accredited, but it sounds like that's been
That could
downgraded
be
to.
true. I mean, I
12.
just, yeah, no, you could be right. It could be 25. Yeah. And we can always, we don't need to have them all in. This could be like some survey we send out just to try to understand why if they want to continue with it. But yeah.
So I have in my written testimony the definition from the United States Department of Education of accreditation. And it is a process used in US education to ensure that schools, post-secondary institutions, and other education providers meet and maintain minimum standards of quality and integrity regarding academics, administration, and related services. It is a voluntary process based on the principle of academic self-governance. So that was the definition that I was using. And as I understand it, your committee is interested in the question of whether every Vermont school should be accredited
Yeah.
by NEASC. And I, listening to the testimony of Mr. Staples, It sounded like there is no research on the effect of NIASC accreditation on school improvement or student achievement. And since your committee's interested in school improvement based on research, I just wanted to bring to your attention that there has been recent and ongoing research on effective school boards and their role in advancing student achievement. And this research suggests that there is a probable relationship between school board beliefs, behaviors, and actions and student achievement. So I'd point you first toward the Iowa Lighthouse study. That was really the first big study on this topic. And it was generated by the Iowa Association of School Boards. And that was ongoing research on effective school boards and their role in advancing student achievement. The studies identified characteristics of school boards of districts with higher levels of student achievement and how they may affect their district's performance. And the conclusion of the Lighthouse study was that school board actions are a key part of a culture of improvement, and school boards can create conditions that promote student learning. The next one I would point you toward, it's in my testimony and there's a link to it, and if you'd like to explore it further, is the 8 characteristics of effective school boards. And this was done by the Center of Public Education, which is the research arm of the National School Boards Association. And it was a meta-analysis of 10 studies and reports on school board leadership, including several based on the Iowa Lighthouse study, which is the first one that I referenced. This list of 8 characteristics is one of the most reputable research-informed lists of attributes of effective school boards. It's commonly referenced at the national level and when researchers are studying school boards. The last one is The Science of Student Achievement by Lorenzen and McCaw, and that builds on the existing research. The authors identified specific actions and behaviors of school boards that they can statistically support as having a correlation with improving student success. So that's all really very interesting.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And we actually have here in Vermont an expert on this. He works for the Vermont School Boards Association. His name is Dr. Phil Gore, and he's only going to be here through March 17th because he's moving to Idaho to work for the Idaho School Boards Association. But if you would like to hear from him, he said that he would be happy to come in and talk with you because this is like he has his PhD in this. He is the co-author of a book, Improving School Board Effectiveness, and he's the author of an article, and I can leave this with you if you'd like. There's a link to the article in my written testimony, but it's this month. This is the American School Boards Journal, and his article is Achievement Culture and What Comes Next. So I'd encourage you to read that and have him come in if you'd like to learn more about the research. He's really knowledgeable.
And basically, Sue, so this is, if you can get the school board, invested, as of course you're invested if you're running, you want to do something there, but work with the school board and training, cultivation, what have you, and then that will help them just continue to be more engaged in the work that's being done.
Yes.
Is that kind of the basic?
That is the basic,
sort of
yeah.
thesis?
And they talk about the 8 characteristics of
Yeah.
effective school boards. They commit to a vision of high expectations.
Mm-hmm.
They have strong shared beliefs and values about what is possible for students.
Mm-hmm.
Accountability driven, spending less time on operational issues and more time on policies to improve student achievement. Collaborative relationship with staff and the community. And they have a strong structure to get community input. They're data savvy, embrace and monitor data even when the information is negative and use it to drive continuous improvement. They align and sustain resources such as professional development to meet the district's goals. Mm-hmm. And lead as a united team with the superintendent. And they take part in team development and training so that they're always also learning themselves about how best to do their job. Because remember, they are elected officials, just like all of you are.
So when you do your training, are those sort of guiding principles for all of you in a way?
Yes.
What you're trying to do with the school board?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to just briefly talk about next. As you'll remember last year, when you passed Act 127 of 2022, which was the Weighting Study Act, that had a piece in it that required each Vermont school district to meet school district quality standards.
Yeah.
And the Secretary of Education has to adopt rules with those quality standards in them. The secretary asked VSBA to develop draft governance standards, because that was part of what you all said had to be in those quality standards, is governance standards. There was also facilities and financial management. So we worked this past summer. We developed a task force, one representative from each of our 11 regions in the state. And Dr. Phil Gore, who I mentioned, was worked with them to review all this research that I just talked about and come up with what we thought the governance standards should be. And we had the VSBA board approve that, and it was sent on to the Secretary of Education. And he took that work and put it right into the proposed rules without any changes. So we felt really good about that we had done a good process, and he was happy with the product. So that's going through rulemaking right now. Once all of that gets through rulemaking, of course, there's in those district quality standards, there's a quality assurance process. And it also all ties in with the educational quality standards. So I guess my concluding remark is that this whole system of the district quality standards coupled with the education quality standards is a mandatory system for Vermont public schools. It's really Vermont focused, and it's more stringent than an external accreditation process. And so based on that information, we really think that whether or not to participate in an external process like NEASC should be a voluntary local decision for Vermont public schools.
Yeah, and what you're saying makes sense in terms of if we're going to really advance, kind of move everybody up, that school board piece. Just like, I remember years ago, we did the principal mentoring bill. I don't know where that is, if that still kind of happens, still does, great. That was done about 12 years ago, my first bill on the floor. It was, again, recognizing that the person leading the school makes a huge difference. Yeah. Great. Questions or anything from Mr. Butsky? Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Oh, would you like this?
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Okay, that'd be great. And I'm gonna ask Katie to make copies of the article. No rush.
If we have time for Mr. Ford to come in, that would be great.
Yeah, so our big thing is, we've got to get these bills out. When is Dr. Gore leaving?
His last day is March 17th.
Crossover.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll put him on the possible radar, depending as long as everything is out by crossover, yeah.
And I'm sure he'd be happy to come in remotely after that.
That
too.
might be nice, yeah. He's going to Indiana?
I don't know. Yeah.
Mr. Nichols. So we'll take a break after Jay talks to us. So as you probably know, we are looking to put forward a study to see how could we get to pre-K in the years ahead. We're trying to sort of put something together for the summer that we would attach to S56 so that we could sort of move that piece of the bill along next year. What's going to come out of health and welfare this year will be won't be a pre-K bill, but will be a bill that will be early childhood. So we're looking for advice and ideas on what should be considered in a study.
Okay,
So that would be helpful.
So again, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of Vermont Principal Association, testifying on S56 and specifically the 4-year-old piece. So I prepared my testimony before I got Hayden's response. So I'm just going to go through that and share stuff with you because I think it's all germane. So it's my understanding that, now we're being asked to consider the concept of the study committee to research the question of having 4-year-olds in public schools. I just want to say for the record, our organization and myself, we don't think we should wait for a study committee to do what we have. What we should do, we think that moving 4-year-olds into public schools sooner than later would have an enormous positive impact on Vermont children in our school system. So I just want to share a few thoughts on that issue. My testimony is centered primarily around the part of S56 that would seek to require public schools to provide what I term early kindergarten That's what we called it a few years ago when we first came up with this concept that was supported by Secretary Holcomb. And is it Commissioner or Secretary or Director Gobey? I'm not sure what his title was at the time, but they were supportive of trying to move forward in this concept. So we've been publicly supporting this policy construct for the last half decade or so. We think the time is now to make necessary changes to Vermont law so that 4-year-old students can have universal access to early childhood education that is high quality and would include all students. And we think the best and actually the only way to do this is open up our public schools and require schools to provide for early kindergarten to all 4-year-olds, like we did kindergarten itself not that many years ago. Under the current system, we often find that many of the students who most need high quality full-day education are not receiving it. Many of our private pre-K businesses do not have licensed teachers actually providing instruction to the students. This flies in the face of research, but consistently supports licensed teachers providing the instructional experiences and opportunities for these children. Although many of these programs are moving toward licensed teachers providing instruction, and we're glad to see those improvements in this area, there are still too many children that are receiving or not receiving the quality programming necessary to really move the needle. We believe now is the time to ensure all 4-year-olds in Vermont have access to full-day programs with high-quality teachers. The truth of the matter from our perspective is that 3- and 4-year-old students with economic supplementation from the education fund and from some parents' pockets are subsidizing the care of students from birth through 3 years of age. And I'm not blaming anyone for this development. It's an outcome of the mixed delivery system we have in Vermont, of federal funding and childcare rules about how many children at certain ages can be served in a setting, and issues around cost of childcare and low pay for childcare providers. Our attempts at universal preschool in Act 166 have contributed to a model where we believe that some students have no realistic options because the 10 hours a week is not nearly enough to make a positive difference. On Thursday last week, I was in Senator Lyons' committee, and I heard about waiting lists for daycare providers. Several of you are in that committee. Our public schools don't have waiting lists. We take whatever students come to our schools and we make it work. We don't discriminate against any children. We accept them all. That is not true with all private daycare providers and businesses. The conversations we were having now about 4-year-olds are the same conversations we were having about kindergarten students decades ago. Right now, we know that there are areas in the state with huge waiting lists, with no real options for kids and families. And many of those children on waiting lists are 3- and 4-year-old students. We can, in a very short order, provide a high-quality, full-day pre-kindergarten program that is developmentally appropriate for every 4-year-old in Vermont. This would be especially beneficial to our most vulnerable and disadvantaged children and working-class families that don't have the means to put 4-year-olds in private daycares. This would be completely optional to parents, just like kindergarten is now. In 1997, we had over 120,000 students enrolled in K-12 schools. Today, we are in the 80,000 student population range. In the aggregate, we clearly have room in our schools. If we require schools to provide early kindergarten to 4-year-olds and fund them just like we do K-12 students to the education fund, we have the opportunity to actually move toward having the best education possible for all students. Want students more ready to learn? Put 4-year-olds in our buildings. Want better literacy, reading test scores and results? Put 4-year-olds in our building and fund it so that schools are truly incentivized to provide high quality programming just like kindergarten. We hear from principals all the time, every week, about how students that are in their school programs generally do much better than students who are not. The sooner we get eyes on and support for our children by trained educators, the better, especially our most historically marginalized and our most disadvantaged students. Moving 4-year-olds into public schools will accomplish this. Many other countries already have early kindergarten programs. Research consistently shows that these programs benefit student learning, academic achievement, self-regulation skills, and vocabulary development, to name a few key findings of early kindergarten programs. Even Oklahoma has added a 4-year-old class statewide. Not exactly a state known for being a beacon of progressive education. And they did this, I think it was 1998, maybe 1999. I've got a link down there for you on the law that passed it for them. And they've done a big longitudinal study out of the Tulsa schools. And essentially what they have shown is that they have higher graduation rates for the kids that went through those programs. They're more likely to go on to college or post-secondary aspirations. They do better overall in school and have better school performance than students that did not participate. Finally, we believe if we put our 4-year-old students in developmentally appropriate programs in Vermont schools in front of highly qualified licensed teachers, this could be the single most positive policy approach we could take to improve the lives of our children. Provide school districts with the same average daily membership rate as we do for kindergarten students and provide full-day programs. It may hurt some private business owners, although I think that's doubtful, especially and we already have waiting lists, and many 3-year-olds would gravitate towards these programs. It may not be popular with advocates who are using education fund monies to subsidize the private daycare model. And it might not be popular with individuals in state government who want to keep control and are dependent on the current status quo. But what it will do is have an immensely positive impact on Vermont children. We believe now is the time to follow the research and put our 4-year-olds in public schools, optional for parents, but mandatory for schools to offer. We think we should seize the opportunity. That said, obviously, if you do any study committee, we will be fully invested. We will do everything we can to help this. This is a major goal for me.
Yeah, I think it's a goal for everybody. So if we were to move forward with the study committee, are there things that you think we should look at this summer? Is there anything in particular that we should be recommending to the healthcare committee to get ready for this? I mean, we've talked with others about, taking a look at transitions, making sure, credentialing, staff, examining space, anything that you think needs to be looked at this summer, or you think we're all set?
I don't think we're all set. I think it's going to be different in different places.
Sure.
And there's some places that are going to end up having to contract out those kids, like they may have to do right now for 9th graders, so they might have to do right now for 5th graders. So there probably will be some of that tuitioning out kids, and there'll be some opportunities for some partnerships there. But I think, Jeff Francis and I were talking the other night about this, and we are of a similar mind that if you give it to public schools to do, we're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
To give us the support that we need, we're going to make it happen. Providing the ADM, if you just provided the ADM this year, in other words, if I do a full day program for 4-year-olds, I actually get to count them in my ADM.
Yeah.
That's going to be really beneficial for poor places like, for an example, St. Albans City, one of the most poor communities we have. They have full day programs right now in their school. It's being paid for. They're paying more than their share of it. Yeah. If we gave them full ADM, at least they would have some tax rate protection.
Senator,
You lost me back on ADM.
Average daily membership is how we determine if a student is enrolled at a school, and it helps drive the per pupil rate.
Okay.
So right now, preschool kids count is 0.43 or 0.46. I always get those mixed up. So it counts as less than half a person. And if we made them count as 1.0, if they were in school for a full day, like we do with K through 6 kids, that would help communities to have preschool.
Okay, can you, for the slow guy in the room, how does ADM affect, counting student numbers, and backtrack to, what's 1, what's Y,
Okay.
4.4.
Yes.
I get that, but I don't see.
You're the slow guy. So a kid, Vermont has an equalized pupil system. You really should have Neil Odell come in and talk about it. He's president of the School Board Association. He can talk about school financing
we've had
in a simple way. He's great. And Brad James is wonderful. Brad comes into new principals and talks to them. But essentially the way to look at this is that a pre-K kid right now, whether they're 3 or 4, no matter how many hours they're in the public school, or in the private daycare, only 10 hours are essentially count, and they can only count for up to 0.43 of an ADM, less than half a kid. First grader counts as 1.0. Kindergarten kid counts as 1.0. Now, with the pupil law changing this year, there are some things in there related to poverty and those types of things that make it even more confusing. But essentially what this would do is a preschool kid, a 4-year-old, if everything else was the same as a kid in the same school for kindergarten, they'd be treated exactly the same in terms of how you would count them for your pupil calculation. That's the bottom line. Now, I don't think I explained that very well. But that's the
You did great.
Third time through, it hit.
Right.
Yeah, Senator Gill.
I have a couple questions that may be fleshed out in a study, but one that keeps coming up in health and welfare is that 3-year-olds really benefit from having 4-year-olds in the room with them.
Yeah.
And by removing 4-year-olds, you would be potentially harming 3-year-olds, or at least affecting them somehow. I know you're not an early educator, but
Right.
is that something that you could speak to, or is that something that if we go ahead with the study, to put it in there?
I think it's worth talking about in the study, but I want to remind you that right now we have a lot of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds that are not served at all. And by serving every single 4-year-old, I think we're making a big step in the right direction. Schools would still be responsible for providing special education services to 3-year-olds like we always have since 1974 when the law was, IDA was passed. So we would still have to do that. So this is not a perfect panacea. But we think if you get all 4-year-olds into the schools, we're going to make a huge difference educationally. If we're really worried about reading scores and having kids be ready for school and students acting out, getting them into school earlier in a developmentally play-based model I think we're gonna be better off, and I think the research supports that.
Is that what happened in Oklahoma?
Well, we get the Tulsa study to look for. I hate comparing us to Oklahoma in any way. But the people from Oklahoma are saying that the kids that have gone through that program are doing better than the kids that haven't. I mentioned Oklahoma in a meeting a couple weeks ago with new principals, and I had principals from there. And she said, don't ever compare us to Oklahoma again. She goes, but she said that program is a lot better than,
Yeah,
at least they have that program, but everything else there, she says is a mess.
got it. Yeah, there you go.
So this is really high level overview, broad brushstrokes, but would you, if you were king, Mr. Nichols, would you want to take Act 166 and take the 10 hours and expand them? Is that sort of the direction that you would
No.
be looking at? No, okay.
No, I would have the 4-year-olds be an early kindergarten class. They'd be part of the public school model, and then you'd have a 0-3 model. And I think we should definitely pay daycare providers more. I'd be willing to pay money towards all that stuff out of my own pocket. I don't think it should be an education fund thing. I think we should say to the education community, you've got the 4-year-olds through the 12th graders, make it happen. Just like we did with kindergarten.
Why stop at 3-year-olds? Why not?
Why stop at 4, you mean?
4-year-olds?
Yeah, well, I'll come back to you another 10 years after we get the 4-year-olds settled in.
I'm
We'll
just
talk about
kind
3-year-olds.
of,
France does 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. I don't know if there's a capacity for that. I don't know. I just know that
I'm just curious.
we feel that 4-year-olds, this was the original model that was proposed several years ago. It's 4-year-olds, and we've had a position statement as a VPA for several years now that we think 4-year-olds should be in public schools and that schools should provide educational services to all 4-year-olds.
Thank you. Again, this is, we're in sort of the creative process here, so I'm just throwing stuff out.
Yep.
If there were childcare providers in the private sector who wanted to become licensed educators, is there a mechanism by which they can do that? Would that be something like having to do peer review, for example, or like? What would
Yeah,
be
I'm not a super expert on the licensing of early childhood, what the pathways are, but I think having somebody in, you could talk to somebody like at the AOE in licensing might be able to help you with that. Sarah Kinney from Let's Grow Kids might be able to help you with that. There's that.
Funny.
I saw her back there. No, but she might be able to tell you more about that because there certainly are some people. I have a friend who has a bachelor's degree who works in early ed. And if she wanted to get her teaching license, I know she could get a provisional stuff, but I'm not sure exactly what she would have to do. That's a great question. And we do want pathways for people that are really good with kids and want to be with kids to help them get licensure, for sure.
Could we ask you, one of the things that I think works successfully in this building is you have a sense, I think generally we all kind of feel the way you do around pre-K. We also know what our direction has been given on this committee is that we're working to, would you be willing to work with your partners to help us come up with some language around what really would need to be looked at? Again, we do have some time. So what are some of the things that we need to be preparing and looking at over the summer? And I have found over the years, sometimes when you say to the V's, can you, on your own time a little bit, of which I know is precious, can you work on some language and bring it back to us for us to consider, and then for us to kind of weigh in from there? Would that be something you'd be willing to do?
VPA would absolutely do that with our executive council. And I think the other V's would, but I hate using the word V's. I think the
I
other
know, but I
education
cannot
organizations
think of any other way. It's like when I arrived, everybody said the V's. Some people say the usual suspects.
Yeah, I like V's better than you.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah.
But yeah, we would definitely.
Thank you.
Willing to
Thank
help
you.
with that.
Thank you. That would be a big help.
Hypothetically, if you have a school district or a school system that is at capacity, so they don't have the space for 4-year-olds, it is, again, you may not have an answer for this, but is there a system by which the district could contract out to independent providers to fill the gaps that can't physically be
Yeah,
filled?
I think all those things would be on the table. We have an example in Vermont not too long ago where I think it was Alberg that didn't have enough room, so they together with their voters built I think it's a licensed daycare and also has a licensed teacher, but I don't quote me on that. But to me, it'd be the same thing as If I don't feel like I have enough kids for kindergarten, well, then I've got to do whatever I got to do. I might have to tuition the kids someplace else. I might have to add to my building. I might have to move programs around.
But Jay, that happens, like if you mentioned ninth grade, if you don't have something.
Happens all the time.
So I don't understand, where would the ninth graders?
I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
I'll use my old place, right?
Yeah.
South Burlington's so crowded, right?
yeah,
I was principal of the middle school.
yeah,
People in South Burlington, if you're watching me right now, I'm not saying do this. South Burlington could
Yeah.
open up a lot of room in their elementary schools. They could take their fifth graders
yeah,
and move them to the middle school. There's
Right.
definitely enough room in that building.
yeah,
That's something they could do. They could do that next week.
yeah,
So that's an example. And it won't be the
Okay.
same everywhere, but we had the same conversations when we started making kindergarten a requirement,
right.
where people said, well, there's not enough room, there's no place for them. Now we won't even think of a school. not having a kid there.
Where were you the principal then?
How old do you think I am? I was the superintendent principal of a place where we only had half-day kindergartens. I had to push very hard to get them to full day.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
Just one last
Yeah,
question. The
please.
Oklahoma study?
Yeah.
Was
Tulsa, Oklahoma State.
Tulsa.
Yes.
Oklahoma study. Is there a study? that
Yeah, it's a
you're-
link in there.
Oh, there is. a
Yeah.
link.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You
Thank
can
you.
read the whole study.
and do you mind coming back maybe next Wednesday?
If my
Thursday?
schedule allows, I'll come back anytime to talk about this.
Or, no, well, with some language that we could start to then jump into a little bit.
Next Wednesday,
All right, we'll call it Thursday, just to get us started. I mean, you guys are the ones who are going to, I know, we're putting you under less pressure, and I recognize that. But, just to help us build something out before town meeting week would be.
in terms of, be more
So
specific
again,
on what you
what
want.
are those things that, some will see it as, oh gosh, we want to start this right away, and I get it. But if you want to look at the fact that we have a little time, we might say it's an opportunity to gear up for pre-K. What are some of those outstanding questions that would need to be answered over the summer by a group of people that are invested in moving this work forward? And, like the ones that we're talking about today are some of the ones that we all are at, what does the training look like? What sort of is it, can you, for example, just talked about this morning, I think, Senator Dulles may have raised it, pre-K, those are littles. And so what's that like being in a elementary school? Is there anything that we need to be thinking about in particular? Any other supports there that we might not, those of us who don't have children might not be thinking, in terms of access to certain kinds of nursing or, all those kinds of things.
I think that'd be a lot of the work the study committee would actually have to engage.
Well, that's what we're wondering, the questions. We're not
Yeah.
asking you to do that, but what are some of those questions? If you could come back and with some of those
Yes,
next week, that would be great. Not the answers to them, just what are some of the questions that we could be figured out over the summer?
okay, we can do that.
You do that and there'll be a little something extra in your paycheck.
Oh,
And by then I
Good
mean
job.
zero.
Yeah, multiplied,
Right.
what you gave me last time. Perfect,
Right. Thank you both.
thank you.
It was great discussion. Committee, let's take 5 minutes and then we're going to come back and hear from our friends at the Vermont State Colleges and then pre-K. And you need to